that guys walk here? Did you know guys walk here?
All right, Dal, you about to launch that video?
In 1710, the Meritorious Manumission Act was enacted in Virginia. Now, it was basically the legal act of releasing slaves for good deeds as defined by the national public policy. Now, the freedom could be granted to a slave for doing a number of things. It could be for saving the life of a slave master. It can be creating an invention a slave master could profit from, or the most commonly used, the most common way this law was used was in the form of what we would call today snitching, where a slave who decided that they wanted to be free, they would, tell or snitch on a slave that they knew was going to organize a revolt or run away. Now, it's critical that the melanated family understands how big of an impact this law had on our, not just our community, but on our psyche as well, right? Because if you look at the 200 plus slave revolts that were attempted from around 1710, I would say, to maybe the late 1800s, most of them were unsuccessful for one main reason. And that was basically a Negro who was scared or felt that they wanted a better seat in the house or a better seat with master. They would tell on any slave revolt they knew that was going to be forming. Even if they didn't have a lot of information, they just used that tactic to free themselves. And this was a and this was a thing that ran rampant in our community at the time. And this was one of the many tactics that the dominant white society used to create separation and mistrust within our community. Now, it's important for you guys to understand that, establishing an invisible hierarchy based on good deeds for people without a hope or identity was pretty much a recipe for disaster. And, it's also important to note that the lingering effects of this can still be found amongst our melanated community or our black community today. The only difference is currently to receive a good deed at this day and age, it would be more or less aligning yourself with the entity or corporation that may use you to reinforce negative stereotypes or use you to demean black people in, a way or another. So if you take a close look at how we interact with each other in black society, it's usually based on some form of, some form of a social construct that we're using. And if you take a step back and kind of
That was a good video, Minnie. Thanks for sharing that. So what are your thoughts on that? We always hear black people are conditioned to sell each other out. Now you got some framework behind where it all started.
I thought it was interesting. I'm familiar with the whole crab in the barrel rhetoric, and it's not my favorite message. But it certainly explains it, and I found it interesting how one of the ways that you might be free by doing a good deed is by saving a slave owner's life. And I thought that was very interesting because I'm like, who are you most likely saving the slave owner from, if not, one of your fellow enslaved souls? So I thought that was interesting, and that'll definitely breed resentment and distrust amongst ourselves. And really, that wasn't really the only thing that they did to to breed distrust between us. Having taken people from so many places with so many different dialects, it's hard to know who to trust, and you can't really understand each other. And then you got people telling them you can't really plan nothing, because it's always gonna be that one person that's going for self, and who's gonna be like, you know what, this is my chance to get the freedom, and I think I have a better chance than joining them. So let me just I read about that in Frederick Douglass's autobiography. He was trying to, one of his first escape attempts was thwarted because somebody snitched, and he was sent away. So I mean, it explains a lot, and I think that we don't give ourselves, or we don't give how deep these mentalities go in terms of how it's been ingrained into our genes after generation to generation. We don't give that much credit towards that process that took hundreds and hundreds of years to manifest itself, and now it's just so deep and bred in us that we don't even realize that we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Denise, what are your thoughts?
I mean, for me, watching that video, you know, it was a lot of that stuff that I saw in that video, stuff that I've either read about or heard about before. But what I also found interesting in the video is some of the people that they put in that video. You know, when you're looking at current day, and one of the more interesting people I found in that video was him putting Jesse Lee Peterson there. You know, for anyone who's never listened to Jesse Lee Peterson, Jesse Lee Peterson is the epitome of what this video was about. If you listen to his show, if you see him on the internet, you know, everything is always about, you know, why the black man needs to stop being whatever the stereotype is that he wants to put out for the day, and why we need to worship the white man. And he's literally said on his show, we need to work, when Trump was running for president, you need to worship him. You know, and so that kind of mindset is so ingrained. And I think when I look at that video, especially, you know, you can go geographically across this country and you can look at some of the highest pain points in the history of enslaved Africans and African Americans in this country, and you'll see the highest concentration in some of those certain areas, which I found to be very interesting too. So it kind of goes to something that Minnie was saying. You know, it's taken hundreds of years, you know, for this to kind of sink in and manifest to the point where, you know, nobody wants to say that for some people it's second nature. It's a part of their culture. It's now like part of the culture that they live by and that they try to guide others by. So this is an issue that, you know, it's very relevant, especially with the election we just had. I mean, it's very relevant.
Yeah, and we definitely get exploited on that. Darryl, were you about to say something?
Nah, I was going to say, if we can just back up a little bit, we started with the video and then you jumped right into the thoughts. Why don't you tell people why you feel this particular topic was relevant as the rest of the country scours to find an agenda to bring before Harris and Biden? So when people talk about agendas and staying on code and the need to either identify as black or keep walking, staying on code as being black or keep walking, why don't you talk about why you felt that was significant? And then we can get to the conversation. It's just for the viewers so that they'll get a better understanding of where this conversation originated from.
Well, you know, I think you hit the nail right on the head when you talk about being on code and today's current political climate. I feel that, you know, black folks as a whole fell for the okie doke with the Biden and the Harris election. I feel that you can't go in without any tangibles. These folks basically got voted in. There was no specific black agenda, and when there was a black agenda brought up or spoken about, it was diluted with a whole bunch of people of color and minorities and LGBTQ plus talk. And I ran into a video the other day with Eva Longoria talking about how the Latino community came out, particularly Latino women, who won the election for the Biden and Harris campaign. And when they pulled the states up in the areas, the regions, those regions were predominantly black regions, and predominantly those black regions voted for and helped seal the election for the Biden-Harris campaign. So, you know, when you talk about the whole thing about being on code, we need to do a better job in identifying those folks who aren't on code and taking them out of the equation. I listened to a broadcast recently, which was a bunch of black gentlemen in a black space. So would you agree black spaces are, for the most part, inherently or in terms of intrinsically safe spaces for us?
Yeah, I definitely agree that. I think we always need to create safe, comfortable spaces where we can speak freely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that in mind, these folks use the term people of color and minorities. So they were just like redundant with it. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching the show and I'm like, why are these black people talking about people of color? I mean, we all know what that term is designed to do. Why are people, and many mentioned it earlier, why are people so afraid to say black?
All right. Oh, is that an open question?
Yeah, it's an open question.
Okay. First, before you,
it really grinds my gears. Go ahead, Daryl.
Now, I was gonna say, before you even answer the question, can somebody just expound what does it mean to stay on code? What exactly does that mean?
We don't have a code. So how can we stand on, like, you know, how can we stay on something if there's no consensus about what that something is? And it's crazy. It boggles my mind how nobody wants to be black. They want to be Cherokee. They want to be Honduran. They want to be Native. Like nobody wants to be black, and that is crazy to me. And I think, like I said, I think last week we haven't given people the language to classify. We've always defined ourselves through the eyes of other people, or let other people define who we are. We have not done that for ourselves. So really, you know, what do we expect them to do? How do we expect them to address us when we haven't given them a name? And the thing about minorities, white women are minorities. Like if you go into corporate America, a white woman is considered a minority. So all the things that we fought for are so much more advantageous and beneficial to every group but us. And it's because we haven't been exclusive enough. But we definitely need to define who we are and who meets those qualifications and who doesn't. And until we do that, there's always going to be a lot of confusion surrounding who we are. And as far as you said being on code, talk about being black, and it's just we get organized. I think the whole looking to someone or to some force outside of ourselves to save us, we have a messiah complex. Like we're always waiting for someone to come through and do something for us. Now we're looking to Biden and Kamala Harris because Trump wasn't doing it. What are we going to do for ourselves by ourselves that doesn't necessarily involve or be contingent upon some other people coming and doing something for us?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a great point.
I agree with that. There's no Superman coming to get us. And I was looking online. It's the site called Onyx Truth. It breaks it down. This is basically the same thing Minnie said. For those who still don't know, staying on code basically means that black people need to develop a code of conduct. This code of conduct is supposed to mean that black people need to put the interests of black society above any and everything else, first and foremost, politically, socially, and economically. We understand
like everybody else does.
Like we understand there are people in mixed relationships. I get all that. But at the end of the day, you have to look out for your community. I've seen white people in mixed relationships, but they stay on code when it comes down to their people. So many, I agree. And then when it comes down to, we're always looking for Superman. We want any and everybody to save us. Anytime we start talking about saving ourselves, developing a plan, an agenda, whatever people choose to call it, we can't even do that without inviting that white elephant into the room so that we can discuss that. The other piece is there are a lot of people who have concerns that, well, I have a Puerto Rican daughter or I have an Asian sister-in-law. We're always worried about what everybody else is going to think about who we are if we stand up for ourselves culturally. And I just think that's a huge issue. I think it's something that has to be addressed. So, Rob, I'm glad you brought this up. I know many just said all that, but I just had to get that off my chest.
Yeah. Hanif, you got anything you want to say?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it also comes down to like the issues of political correctness. There's, we have this idea that we have to be politically correct all the time and in every space when no one else is being politically correct with us, for us, to us. And, if there's anything that we've seen from the last 4 years, it's that like if we're not going to get together and we're not going to band together around actual issues and do something, we're going to have other people that's going to band together on some old, not even issues, but on some old lies to try to promote an agenda that is anti-us, that is about the death of us, and that has nothing to do with what we should be doing. This idea, I mean, I know many said it's like the Messiah complex. I think it's a little bit of searching for the Messiah while also, for some people, longing for master. Because some people, like, they're searching for, this one person to come and make these things better. But some people are also reaching back and looking for that one person. Well, if I could just eat some of the crumbs from his table, I'd be good. And it's, no matter how you look at this, no matter where your stance in life is, no matter what your belief is, when it comes down to us as a community, if we can't work together with ourselves, then who can we work together with? I mean, the days of expecting government to do this for you should have been over a long time ago. If you want government to take a hand in helping our community, then we need to be more present in government. If we're not going to be more present in government, and even if we are more present in government, it's still on us to do what we need to do for us.
That's a good point. Being present in government and not being on code is useless. And you see that. I mean, can anybody name a Black politician that's unapologetically Black? Can you name one? And I think based on the definition that, Darryl read, I look at being on code as doing what you can to uplift the community and support the community while not engaging in deleterious activities that would be harmful to the community. I think it's just that simple. And we see it across every spectrum, whether you talk about Black churches, HBCUs, corporate America, the education structure. I mean, Black people aren't on code. And why are we so concerned and worried? Let's talk about why are we so concerned and worried about what everyone else thinks? Because they're not concerned about what we think when it comes to them. And there's innumerable examples to illustrate that.
I think some of this is also, not everyone, but some of us have spent so much time looking at what other people are doing and how other people are protecting, building, working on their communities, that while we spent all that time doing that, we weren't paying attention to our own either. With some of us, we're looking at making the comparison and not looking at, well, what can we do? What's in my hand that I can do right now? I may not have the resources of this community, but what can I do with these resources that I have right now? And on top of that, for some, if you want to look at other communities, look at how other communities do things with generational planning in mind. It's not even just about, man, if I get mine, that's what's important. It's about, I want to set this up so that when I'm gone from this earth, whoever's following behind me, this generation, can be doing a bit better than I was, and they can build off of this same platform so that the next generation is doing better, and the next generation is doing better, to a point where we can become sufficient and not have to search for either a savior to come in the form of some man or woman. Usually that savior winds up being a politician. We're not looking for a politician to come in and fix something, and we're not looking for a master to come in and become the new lord over something.
Let me ask you this. Do you think, this is for the whole panel, do you think we have a symbiotic relationship with white supremacy? That we can't live without it? I see many up. Go ahead.
I think symbiotic is the wrong word, because symbiotes are mutually beneficial to their host. Without that mutual benefits, you're just a parasite, and that's why I say we fund and fuel our own oppression, and all we have to do is stop. And to go to that powerful, statement that Hanif said when he said we were longing for master, that was deep. We got textbook Stockholm syndrome, and it's a fear that we have, and there's comfort. People find comfort in white supremacy. Believe it or not, even our ancestors, who after the Emancipation Proclamation stayed on the plantation, they said we're not leaving. We don't know what's out there. We don't know how we're gonna do it, so we're gonna stay right here. And I think, anytime you talk about revolution, it's like, well, we're too dependent. We need they feed us. They give us jobs, even though we created those things, those systems, those agricultural systems. We can feed ourselves. We taught them how to feed ourselves. They made us forget. Now they give us back scraps, and we're grateful for it. And that's crazy. I remember I was doing an internship, and we was pitching business ideas, and my business idea was unapologetically Black, and there was no accident about it. It wasn't by coincidence. And that's all I heard, even from Black people, even from Black people that I respect and whose opinion I value. They said, you're limiting yourself, by being too Black, you're limiting yourself to a certain population. I said, why is that? We all shop at Toyota. We all shop at Ford. They we go to Walmart. We go on. I go on Amazon. I got a little habit. I get that, but they're not super inclusive of Black people. Nobody says to them, hey, there's no representation other than the standard atypical Americans, the white middle-aged white male. You're limiting yourself. Nobody says that, and if they do say it, they still proceed with whatever plan to market and reach their target audience that they have. So why should me being unapologetically Black about my business be limiting? It shouldn't be limiting, especially if we support each other. So that's real live Stockholm syndrome. We have fallen in love with our captors, our oppressors. We don't want to offend them. That Asian niece that you have, does she use her resources and leverage the resources at her disposal for the benefit of our community? Just because you love her, just because she show up to the cookout, but she make the fried rice, don't mean that she's an ally. She's for us, and that's somebody who should stop us from moving forward with our movement. Why won't we get organized? Like, I just
That's a term I hear thrown out a lot by Black folks. Allies. We got to find allies. We got to create coalitions. And when you talk about the Asian niece, I saw something on Dr. Boyce Watkins' website saying, name me one black business in an Asian community. You're not going to find one. You're not going to find one. One of the things you mentioned too, I think it was you, Minnie, or it might have been you, Hanif, about the personal gain, the private gain, the individual benefits. People are so willing to get that private gain and those individual benefits against the best interest of the Black community. So you're going for self, knowing that going for self is going to harm the community. And I go back to Hidden Figures, when Homegirl had an opportunity to get that role in the IBM room, and what does she do? What about my girls? What about them? Oh, don't worry about them. I can't go. She made a sacrifice that helped the whole Black community in that building working for NASA. How many Black folks do you know that have done that, are willing to do that? That goes back to being on code.
But I think, some of the things like Minnie was saying, it reminds me of a quote that I heard from Les Brown. Les Brown said that some people would rather live in a known hell than explore an unknown heaven. And in the context of that quote, he was talking about people not wanting to venture out and try something because it's too risky. They would rather stay in this hell that they know that's familiar, even though it's still hell, than go out and explore heaven that's unknown to them. And yes, it may be hard at first. Yes, you may have some challenges to go through. But when you get through all of that, you're in a space that is far better than the one you're comfortable in staying in. Comfort is something that, breeds complacency. And if you're going to allow yourself to stay comfortable, you're going to get complacent. And anytime you get complacent, you then become apathetic. And now you're like, well, I know I probably should, but I'm comfortable where I am. So, and since this doesn't really affect me, at least not that I can see, I'm just going to kind of stay with the status quo and keep it moving that way. It's one of the biggest issues that I think about for myself personally, and being a father is, I don't mind having, comfort from time to time, but it can't be all the time to the point where I get complacent and I'm not willing to do what's necessary. And I think that's also a larger part of what we saw in that video. Some people were trading, what they perceived to be, some better comfort for, and not seeing the bigger picture of greater freedom for everybody. And we still see some of that happening today. We see that whether we want to talk about the parasitic relationship of white supremacy, whether we want to talk about the lack of group economics, the lack of pushing for education and certain things. I mean, there's so many ways we see that kind of mindset.
Hey, Daryl, a guy named Jesse had a couple things that showed up on the screen.
Benefield says we basically what everybody else is saying, we are behind enemy lines, so how we move forward has to be calculated. There are a lot of times, I know I was in a conversation the other day, and guys kept asking, well, what is the agenda? Well, we can't share that agenda on the internet. We can't share it on Twitter. We can't share it on Facebook. We can't share it on the radio. For the folks from the Springfield area, we know that cats get on 90.7, and everything they say they're gonna, every strategy they have, they get on 90.7, or they'll get on Facebook and they just don't put it all on Front Street. How the hell you going to war behind enemy lines and you sharing all your information? It's just kind of crazy. Everything we do has to be tactical, which is why it's important for folks to stay on code. The other side about staying on code is, at what point do we get off code? When you have Pookie and them cats down the block and they're still selling crack and they're still flying down the street shooting at people, do we stay on code and protect them? When you have a celebrity like Ice Cube, do we stay on code and say, okay, let's just give this contract a chance, or do we explore it to see if it's actually feasible? How do we determine when we stay on code and when we step off code? Or is accountability a mechanism being on code? I'm just throwing that out there for folks.
I mean, I think accountability has to be a mechanism for being on code. And if on code, if part of being on code and building our communities is making sure that our communities are safe, that they're healthy, that they're growing, then as a community, we can't allow Pookie and them to be shooting up on the street and selling drugs. That's part of being on code. It ain't nothing against Pookie and them, but it's about making sure that as a community, we're doing what's right for the health of the community. And if you're not going to do what's right for the health of the community, we need to, as a community, deal with that. If we're not willing to deal with that, then, what's the point of putting a code together that's supposed to be about the betterment of us as a whole when we won't deal with what's going on inside the house?
Okay. And I asked that question because a lot of times in our community, we tend to equate blackness with what neighborhood you're from, how hood you are, whether or not you've been to jail, whether or not you ever sold anything on the block. We have a tendency. So at what point do we draw expectations in terms of, you can't even talk about a code of conduct if we're not talking about what the expectations are? How far are people willing to go to stay on code? Are you willing to lose your job? Are you willing to get arrested, falsely arrested at any given day because you speak out on issues? And you don't have to go out there and be Fred Hampton, but you have to stick to your own. There are always consequences when you're black in America, well, black in Western civilization, and you step up and you stay on code for black people. So what are the expectations? How far do we go? So it's easy to say let's stay on code, but who's willing to lose their job?
It's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, because there's consequences when we do stay on code, and there's towards us as a community, and there's consequences when we're not on code towards us as a community. I heard a quote saying that white supremacy breaks their tools. So, let's use Omarosa, for example. She was in the forefront spouting whatever rhetoric she was spouting. And then after they were done with her, they got rid of her. So even if you think that you're doing something, that meritorious manumission, even if you think you're doing something to make the dominant society happy, when they're done with you, they're done with you.
But Rob, you brought white people in. I'm talking about black people. I don't give a damn about what I mean. So I asked the question, are you willing to stay on code on your job to the point where it means losing your job? Freak the rewards. Are you willing? The question is, are you willing to live with that? What are your expectations? What are the parameters around being on code? Who cares what white people think about us? I found that out firsthand back when I was in the 3rd grade. So tell me something different. What are the parameters? If we're going to talk about, what it means to be black and staying on code, we need to talk about the perimeters. To what extent? We had Max Parthas on let me just finish this. We had Max Parthas on a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about how we're still enslaved. And he's a modern day abolitionist. Who's willing to be a modern day abolitionist 24/7 because you have to stay on code? Or is it staying on code like a 9 to 5 thing? Or better yet, after work, is it from 5 to like midnight? So let's talk about that.
Well, I've got a personal example. I'm not going to say what company, but when I raised some concern about the lack of, I didn't say diversity, the lack of black people being in a metropolitan area, are you trying to tell me you can't find any black underwriters? And I raised that to my manager, and then he raised it to the branch manager. And all of a sudden, I found myself being treated differently. So I asked the question. So I would say yes. I ended up changing jobs because of some of the retaliation towards me, and I was a good worker and I was highly thought of. But when I brought that to the forefront, because it was troubling, I was getting retaliated against, and I just moved on to another company.
Okay.
But I knew they were definitely treating me differently, and eventually I probably would have ended up getting terminated at some point.
But here's my thing about what you're saying, D.
I'm listening.
That I question about this. It's like, if we're talking about how we're willing to stand on code, at the risk of losing our job, are we also talking about how, if we're trying to stay on code for the sake of our community, building things up, is our community, when we're standing up for our said community, willing to, in those moments, gird us up until we're able to get what we need to do to provide for our families? Because at the end of the day, there's not a single one of us on this call right now, on this broadcast, there's not a single one of us that's watching this broadcast that does not need money to pay their bills. So if we're going to talk about being on code 24/7, 365, 366 on that leap year, then what about everyone else that's looking for us to be on code? Are they going to be able to, are they willing, not be able to, are they willing to support us when being on code costs us our livelihood that we need to feed our families? Well, because I think, and the reason why I bring that up, and the reason why I bring that up is because when I look at some of the communities that people mention in passing of old and haven't really studied, like Black Wall Street, for example, everyone mentions Black Wall Street, Black Wall Street, Black Wall Street. But how many people have actually looked into what Black Wall Street was doing, how they were doing it, why this community was phenomenal, and why it wasn't the only one? And seeing how the community was there every step of the way, and the community made sure that the community was functioning.
But it's hard to bring up Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's hard to bring up Durham, North Carolina. It's hard to bring up all those communities where we flourished industrially prior to desegregation. So at that point, there was no choice but to be there for each other. You had no choice. You're fresh off the plantation. You're confined to a certain area, so you make it work. And then when you look at all the skill sets that were coming off those plantations with, people automatically assume slavery and think dumb Negroes. That's the colonizer speaking. We're talking about your carpenters, your blacksmith, your mechanics. Everybody coming off those plantations had a skilled trade, so they were able to create industrious communities. They didn't rely on a formalized European educational system to learn. So it's hard to contrast. It's like Bible thumpers when they compare our life today with what happened 1,000 years ago. Culturally speaking, completely different. How we function, completely different. But I will go back to when it comes down to staying on code. We already know we start off the show talking about meritorious manumission. Did I say that correctly, Rob?
Yeah.
Okay. We already know. Let me just finish this thought, Minnie. I see you. We already know that the vast majority of Negroes are comfortable. We've established they're comfortable with being on the plantation. They understand that slavery still exists in so many different forms, and they're cool with that. The question is, for those of us who are trying to say that everybody else needs to stay on code, before I can tell you that you need to stay on code, I got to be on code. And we talk about, somebody says, all right, I'll stay on code, but what are the perimeters? We need to have an adequate response. Minnie, I ain't going to keep talking. I see you had your hand up. Say something.
All right. So just to go comment on what you said about, the code, I just want to point out, the white power structure stays on code.
Always.
When they switch their code, when have they abandoned their code? That's the purpose of a code. If it's working, sure, it may need to grow and evolve. But if the code is working prior to chaos and anarchy, there's never a reason to really abandon the code. And as far as we have to abandon digital platforms for planning and organizing. I've been said we need to go back analog. There were no signs along the Underground Railroad. There was no safe house here, escaped slaves come here. Hey y'all can that it wouldn't work that way. We can't be making private moves on public forums. Can that be a means to get everyone together? Sure. Do we have to vet people? Absolutely. We need a system to control the flow of information to the point where it's not so easy to be infiltrated. Can we make it just a little bit hard for them? Like, you know what I'm saying? Not too hard, but just a little. And when it comes to this code, we need to figure out what we want. What do we want? What do we want our future to look like? Because it's easy to just be walking and end up someplace nice and be like, oh, I got somewhere.
Right.
And those are, you can reap what you sow, or you can sow what you reap. You can know where you're going and know that you have to take a left here, a right here, another right there, go around the roundabout, take the third exit. Like, when you know where you're going, you can direct your steps so you're not wasting your time, so you're not just wandering. So what do we want? And once we figure out what we want and we can arrive to some sort of consensus, then we can work backwards and develop a code and an agenda and a system to get there. But until we reach that consensus, we just wandering in the wilderness. And we just so happen to come up on some luck in here and there, but it's not organized, it's not directed, it's not properly channeled.
Correct.
Or as are you willing to lose your job? Some people are not. I think that has to be okay for now. You know what I mean? It's too much when it comes to the content. It's too much shaming, too much flexing. You know what I mean? Too much ego. Because just because that person may not be willing to quit their job, that does not mean that they can't play an impactful role in the movement. They can say, look, I got to keep my job, but anything I hear, you know what I'm saying, I can bring it back and let y'all know. Or if y'all want me to maybe distribute some false information or whatever the case may be, then you can still use that person. People say to know what people say and watch what they do, and I think that's backwards, because people will say anything. You gotta watch what people say and listen to what they do, because when you come across those situations where somebody has a choice either to be for us or against us, and they could be, and they're either for us or they're either against us, or they may be middle of the road. We need to know who people are, because if you are a co-conspirator and you are a white power structure sympathizer, we need to know who you are, because if we have these honest conversations and we know who people are, who we're dealing with, they can still be used. We can still use that person that doesn't want to lose their job, whether they're down for the cause or whether they're not. They can still be used. All the
still play a role
on a chessboard.
Yep.
They say something, they do something, they accomplish something, they're good for something. Even the opposing team, the opposing pieces.
Okay.
Are you saying that the people on Black Wall Street would have made different choices if they had more choices?
I'm not saying that. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is, given the circumstances, they made it work. But when we talk about how they stood together and they stayed on code, the bottom line is, when you're talking segregation, I don't know if anybody's ever visited a segregated community down south, but it wasn't as if you can venture off the field anytime you want, like you can do up north in the way we live our lives now. We're basing a lot of what happened then on how we live today and what the societal expectations, standards, rules, and perimeters are. Different back then. Everybody in Black Wall Street went there for a specific reason, because there was a supportive community. They had to have each other's back coming off those plantations. Free slave, ex-slave, doesn't free black, formerly enslaved black, it doesn't matter. They had to go to these certain communities. And Tulsa wasn't the only one. They were all over the country. But whenever people kind of stepped off the block, we seen what happened to them very same communities. They were destroyed. So I use the example, lose your job. That's like the weakest thing that can happen. We've had people historically who has lost their lives. I was going to say who's willing to lose their lives, to stay on jobs, to stay on code. So I get it. You also talk about how white people stay on code 24/7. They do. When you have something that you have to sustain and maintain, and you don't want to lose what you've already taken from people, yeah, you got to stay on code. But there's no consequence when they stay off, because so many are still on. They have what they want. The system was created by them, for them. We're like the ant underneath the little kid's boot. I can't negotiate with that ant. So if I don't do the right thing, any wrong turn means I get stepped on. So people need to understand that. So as we plan accordingly, we have to understand what the perimeters are. To walk into this blind and say everybody needs to be black like I am, when we're so diverse in terms of our philosophies around blackness, it's ridiculous. We got local officials around here, black officials, who have never done shit for the black community, but they get the full support of the black community. We have 5 city councilors. 2 or 3 of them may be good. We have some who run around, they're the blackity, black, or the Black Lives Matter protests, even put their name on flyers. But where are they when the community needs them? We have young brothers losing their lives. Are they on code? No. I've worked with folks, these middle-class Negroes, when things happen. The first thing we say when something traumatic happens in the black community is, well, look at their lifestyles. Nah, man, staying on code means understanding their lifestyles and all the variables that come into play. That's staying on code. Staying on code means when you're on a job and they're just blatantly discriminating and just dogging black people, and you sit there and just nod your head and you don't challenge, there are appropriate and tactical ways of doing that. But I think we need to step up and define the perimeters. I'm all over the place right now, but I get where you're going. Yeah, it says something about how do you keep people on code? There has to be consequences. How far are we willing to go if somebody breaks code? If somebody, sell out a person who betrays something to which he or she owes allegiance. In the racial context of black Americans, it's a disparaging term that refers to black to knowingly or with gross negligence acts against the interests of the black community on a whole. When somebody breaks code and they sell us out, what are we willing to do? I said the other night, the brother who was responsible for Fred Hampton and them fellas getting murdered in Chicago, he's still alive. He's getting paid to do documentaries. He does radio interviews. He has a book. We're rewarding people. He's just one example of, God knows, they had the docudrama on Malcolm X on Netflix. Them brothers down in Jersey who murdered Malcolm, they were complicit, working with the white establishment to kill the brother. Man, some of them cats they died natural deaths. And the city is brutal as Newark. So the thing is, I could go after Rob if Rob does me wrong for some trifling shit. He's trying to kick it to my girl, whatever. But when cats break code and they do things that pull back on the character of black folks and set us back by years, we do nothing. So again, I think it's about perimeters. How far are we willing to go? Are you willing to die for this? Dude said being on code means never forgetting slavery is legal, which means it's a nonstop, constant fight. In any wrong turn means that we're going to be consequenced by white America and all their allies. They have allies. We don't. What are we willing to do about that? So perimeters, consequences, what are the levels? There are levels to this shit. What are those levels? And if we're not talking about that, then we're not really talking.
Yo, all that stuff hit home because you and I talk all the time. When it goes about being on code, and Minnie talked about it too. It's like you got to vet these people. You got to watch out for the people who act like they're on code, who ain't on code. we've had some discussions, some dinner and dialogues where, Daryl, you and I thought there were actual agents in the room, and that may have been the case. The way they were moving and how they were acting.
The dude you're talking about, he is an agent. I'll put my price on it.
Yeah, that was some crazy mess.
No such thing as coincidence. Oh, he was an agent, but go ahead.
Yeah. And there are levels to it.
Hold on, Rob. And he still gets to walk his dog through downtown Springfield every day. No repercussions.
We're naming names today. Unapologetic. So, I mean, for me personally, it's like, okay, you ain't down with the cause. I can't roll with you. I'm putting you over here. But to Minnie's point, they might, everybody's got a role to play. So maybe, you treat them as a double agent or a triple agent or whatever, because we got them rolling around in our community, and you look at Springfield as a microcosm to a larger, more national issue. And then when you look at no one can name a black politician who's unapologetically black. They may at times be black, but they definitely ain't on code. Because if you're on code, you're on code.
Russell Holmes from Boston, the state rep out of Boston, Mass. Unapologetically black, 24/7, always on code. Got to shout him out. State rep Russell Holmes. All right, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Russell. We appreciate you. We need more like you. If you're on code, you just have to be on code. Now, I can give examples of people I know who have been on code. I bet you Minnie can. I bet you Hanif can. And Daryl, I know you can. So what did you do with those folks that you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt they weren't on code? Did you kick them out in the fringes, or did you kind of keep them close?
Well, the question is,
I limit their
go ahead. What'd you say, Hanif?
Me personally, I limit their access. If there is something from a transactional basis that we can still do that has nothing to do with everything else, then that's cool. Then that's, I let people define the relationship they're going to have with me. And so if you show me that you're not going to, be who you said you are, cool. Then that's what we're going to be. If you show me that the only kind of relationship we can have is a transactional one, where I'm getting something from you, you're getting something from me, whether it's business, whether it's business that's making me money, whether it's business, like we were talking about, Daryl, the difference between being in position and positioning. If it's business that allows me to get in position for something, or business that gives me some positioning in an area, if that's what our relationship is, because that's what you show me, that's cool. But once you show this to me, you don't get access to everything. I'll borrow a biblical reference that I used when I talked about stuff like this. In the Old Testament, they talked about when they built the tabernacle. You have the outer court. Everybody was allowed in the outer court. You have the inner court. That's where the priests were. You have the Holy of Holies. The high priest was only allowed to go there once a year. And if that high priest did not come in there the right way, they would die. Our lives and our circles have to be very similar to that. Because if someone who's only qualified to be on the outer steps inside, and they're not qualified for that, they're going to abuse it, or they're going to report it, or they're going to say something or do something that they shouldn't be saying or doing, and our business is going to be in a place it's not supposed to be in. So me personally, I either will cut you off completely, or I will limit the access based off of whether this relationship is beneficial.
All right. I can get with that 100%. 100%. So, Rob, back to you. What you got next?
Let's get into some of the churches and the Boule and HBCUs. The churches, I was given a statistic, which I was shocked of, but I shouldn't have been shocked, that there are over 470 Black churches in the city of Springfield. And that's probably going to be the case in many Black cities or towns where you got more churches than you can shake a stick at. What do you think Black churches should be doing? When we talk about being on code too, we can wrap that up in there. What do you think Black churches should be doing to help the Black community? Minnie.
I think
we need some of that money back.
You need what back?
We need some of that money back. We pay like over $1 billion a year in tithes. And if that money was going to an institution that was beneficial to the Black community, then there would be a proportionate amount of progress. I'm not saying all churches. They certainly don't do anything systemic for us. But the churches, we wouldn't be liberated. So many of us wouldn't have made our way to freedom if not for Black churches back in the day. We should do less shouting and dancing and praising and do more planning. There should be a group in during service in the basement making moves under the guise of doing something that the white power structure deems appropriate for us to do, just like it was back in the day. We need that.
Well, was it really like that back in the day? Because, you know, when Martin Luther King was doing his thing, he wasn't getting support.
I'm talking about
he wasn't getting support from the Black church. He was getting support from Black women and Black men, businesses and donations from them, but the Black churches weren't supporting them. When I look at the Black church, one of the things you said about give us that money, but you know, what are they doing around education? Where are they banking at? Are they banking at white institutions, or are they banking at Black banks? You know, if you got over 400 churches, why can't they create their own Black community bank?
You know what? Let me jump in this. I think it's a little different. I think the first thing we need to do is some resource mapping, because it's hard to talk about what Black churches are or are not doing. I'm a preacher's kid. My mom's had a church for about 30 years and married in my grandparents before that on both sides. And when I look at the work that I've watched them do and had to be forced to participate in as a preacher's kid, I know that they give back. So we treat the Black churches if they're one, the same way white people treat Black people, we treat the Black churches if they're just one big monolith. When you look into the overhead, I look at my mom's church. That mortgage had to get paid, the lights had to stay on, the heat. They made sure they kept the kitchen stacked because they fed any and everybody who walked through the doors, and 9 times out of 10, they set up shop outside and just feed people in the neighborhood. So, but that type of stuff goes undocumented. The thing the Black churches don't do is they don't, unlike politicians, they don't go and publicize everything that they're doing. So there are some churches that do jack shit except for saying, you know, give your life to God, prepare for the afterlife. And that's it. But then there are a lot of churches that do a lot of good work. I know when I think back to the historical commission thing here in Springfield, St. John's Congregational Church was up on it. We were allowed to hold forums in there. We were allowed to organize in there. So there are churches that do good work. And I think we need to acknowledge that. When we say the Black church, I don't know what these expectations are, but it's not like they're just this huge, giant, mega robot that just comes together at will. So I think we have to do some resource mapping, find out what institutions, not just the church, but a lot of these social institutions. I'm always hearing about sororities and fraternities. What exactly are you doing? We need to map our resources and capacities. The first thing we need to do is try and figure out what exactly we do have, what we don't have, what's functional, what's dysfunctional. Anything dysfunctional, we either help to rebuild it or we get rid of it. So I think that's how we look at when we start addressing institutions, instead of making sweeping statements saying what they are not doing, especially if we're not members. At this point, I ain't been a member of a church in about 20 years. So me personally, who am I to speak on it? I can base it on my experience at my mom's church. But if I'm not contributing to those ties, I'm not in there trying to help organize their 200, 300, 400 members, or in some cases, their 5 or 10 members, do I really have a voice in terms of what they do and what they don't do? So it's hard to say Black churches without looking at it from a different angle. If we're not a part of it, then we're not really helping it.
You know, and I think that's an interesting point, because one of the things that, you know, I remember when we had your brother on the show, one of the things he said that has stuck with me is he said, you know, you have some people now that they stop viewing, you know, being in the church or starting a church as a calling from God, and are viewing it as an occupation for themselves.
Absolutely.
And, you know, when you have people that, I mean, because let's be honest. I mean, a lot of the times we give flack to the Black church, you know, when it comes to talking about these issues. But man, we gonna act like some of these other churches that are not Black aren't doing some of the same stuff, or some of these other organizations are not doing the same stuff and in fact doing worse stuff to us. I mean, you've got whole denominations that were formed because they wanted to keep their slaves, but that's a whole nother issue. But when we're talking about this in general, I think what you said, D, is exactly right. Where's the resource map as to who's doing what and who's willing to do what? Because you have a lot of people that are willing to do things if they only know how to do it. Some people, there's just not the level of expertise in the house to know how to do certain things. But when that expertise is brought in and people can see what to do, you'll find people that are ready to mobilize, you know, and I think that's one of the things that is really critical when we talk about this. But, you know, it's also to like what you're alluding to, D, when we talk about resource mapping when it comes to the feminine sororities. Like, what are they doing? What are they not doing? Are they also willing to mobilize and do the same thing? Are these various organizations willing to mobilize, be on code, and do the things that, you know, it's easy to talk about, but not always as easy to do? Or are they just taking up space, or just, I don't know what the right word here would be, whether it's taking up space or whether they're here for the pretense and not the truth, whatever the case you want to call it. So that, like, that same, you know, being someone that's been a Christian for a long time, you know, I'm very critical of things that I see that don't match what it's supposed to be, you know, and what I believe it's supposed to be based off of the faith that I have. But at the same time, man, I've seen churches do some stuff and they never publicize it. I've seen churches they have congregations full of people that are doctors and nurses and dentists, send them out to Haiti, do free clinics, ship 2,000 pounds of medicine out there, clothing, all this other stuff. So there are people doing things, there are people not doing things. And the only way we're going to discover who's going to be helpful and who's not going to be helpful is if we do that research.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Got to vet every avenue. You know, I think they could be doing more, but then again, it goes back to the whole resource mapping. How do you know if they can be doing more if you don't know what they're doing or what they're willing to do? You know, when you talked about the Greek organizations, and you've got, you know, male Greek organizations and female Greek organizations, and I'm not too familiar. I was in college, and, you know, I was invited to pledge a bunch of them, but I didn't have any interest. But how could you be a collective group of Black men or Black women, and affiliating yourself with a Greek flag? It just seems counterintuitive to me when you look at the fraternities and sororities.
People don't want to be Black. For real, I got into it with a friend of mine a couple of days ago because he was like, I love Greek mythology. And I was like, yeah, me too. It was all stolen, but yeah, it's cool. How would you say that? And I'm like, because it's stolen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what did you, I would rather be closer and more connected and more knowledgeable about the source as opposed to that which has been perverted and plagiarized. But not everybody feels. Some people are very content with what they know and what they don't know. And it sounds to me like we need to bring back the days of the conferences and the conventions. Because whenever I read about influential or impactful leaders, they always have some sort of convention or some sort of conference that set a lot of things in motion. Because when it comes with like vetting and resource mapping and coming up with a system and a code, we have to do that together as a unit, especially because we are not a monolith. So to me, it sounds like we can take, you know, what we know of organizations that are seemingly pro-Black or seemingly pushing forward a Black, and we could see what they're doing, see who they work for, and maybe use them to get connected with other organizations we're not aware of, and everybody send a representative from that organization to this conference, to this meeting, so we can see what do you see that the issues are, what resources you add that can contribute to this to solving this issue, and with as many people, the organization's input as we can come up with what are the resounding themes as far as the issues that we're facing, and we can have a list of those resources and we can grow those resources, and then we put forth an agenda, a code. We come up with a system, and we replicate that system in every city. And then every city has that has a representative that meets on a state level. And then every, you know what I mean? Like, we have to establish a government. And it's simple, not easy, but we need to establish a government. There's a lot of other races. They're not politically aware, politically involved. They don't wait for someone to save them. And they're doing just fine. And we need our own government. When it comes to people staying on code, should we protect them? Yes, we should protect them, because we don't want their lives to be subject to the white power structure. But we should have a system, a government, or a code of consequences and levels. Okay, this is your infraction, this is your offense, and so on. And so we need those systems in place, and we also need we need to be aware of those resources, and we need to know exactly who we're dealing with, because a lot of us don't know who our enemy is, but we cannot agree on who the enemy is. I think that's why you got all of our shooters, all of our muscle out there killing each other, as opposed to everybody working together to defeat a cop. And we don't do that kind. And that's why Donald Trump, I really have no beef with Donald Trump. I don't like the smoke screen. I want to know who I'm dealing with. And a lot of people came together. A lot of people, communities, and even businesses, they got creative and figured out ways to stay connected and ways to make money, because we had a common enemy and there was a common threat. And that's one thing that having a blatant common enemy does, because we suffer some of the most terrible atrocities in the face of Black leadership. And it lulls us into a false sense of security, which breeds complacency, which is not conducive to positive change. So we need to know who our enemy is, and we need to come together with one goal in mind, even if that goal is to just know who we are. You know what I mean? We got to do something. We got to do it like yesterday.
Yeah, time is of the essence. I agree with you there. And it's like people always ask, why when you talk like there's a sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
There's a sense of urgency. So we either do this right, or our grandkids will be having, I say it all the time, our grandkids are going to be having the same conversation, figuring out, okay, what do we do next? Minnie, I think what you said about the conferences, listen, man, that's absolutely necessary. Workshops, forums, all time. Those need to be, they need to happen. They need to be coordinated. We need to talk about everything from spirituality to the arts to economic development. We need to be addressing those things. So I agree. I couldn't agree with you more on that. That right there really sticks out for me. Let me go to the sidelines. Jesse Benefield says, controlling your own economic system brings freedom. But we've had, again, in the past, as we talked about earlier, we've had, control of our own economic system, and it didn't necessarily bring freedom. It brought comfort. I think we need to understand the difference between freedom and comfort. Freedom, that shit means free. If I got to explain that, then we don't have to. I dig where you're coming from. The economic system is a part of everything else, political, intellectual, economic. We have to have this organized. It's a pie. Emma says it takes creativity to develop programs that effectively improve and strengthen communities. Politicians, professionals, community leaders sometimes lack the creativity needed. I couldn't agree with that more. Not just the creativity, the ability to engage with people on all levels. We have grassroots organizations who are never invited to the table to talk about social issues with politicians and business leaders. Whereas the folks on the grassroots level, they're there. They walk it, talk it, live it, and breathe it. Politicians are supposed to take that information, frame it, and make sure that the resources come back to address it. The business community is supposed to, contribute financially. That's not happening. So it takes creativity in terms of just getting those people on board and making sure that the level of engagement is in place. I couldn't agree with you more. So, Rob, I'm going to turn it back over to you, man. I'm running my mouth a lot.
Yeah, one of the things that Minnie said that was, though, when she talked about communities that have it together and don't really have the voting might, one of the things that is a common denominator with those communities is that they control their own economy. That they're not dependent on what the political process is. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican, a Democrat, it doesn't matter who the governor is, it doesn't matter who the president is. They control their own economy. And We got to get back to that. We talk about is white ice colder? We know the answer to that. We know it's no. But when you're throwing 1.3 to 1.7, depending on what economist you talk to, $1 trillion away, and you're not corralling that economic might, which brings you in the top 20 economies of the world. There's over 230 something sovereign nations, according to the UN. When you're taking those trillions of dollars and you're not doing anything with it, and it's just going out the window. Meanwhile, when they talk about, oh, the hood is poor, everybody sets up shop in the hood. Everybody sets up shop in the hood, and they extract those dollars out to their community. The hood's not poor. There's money there.
Remember when the mob broke into Harlem? What they call it, nigger pennies?
Oh yeah.
We might be broke, but we ain't never poor. Because everybody, man, listen, if we were broke and poor like everybody said, those Chinese restaurants would be gone. Those Pakistani, Saudi Arabian, wherever, all those little gas stations and stores, they would be gone. So it's kind of like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but I just can't.
No, go ahead, man. Go ahead, finish up.
No, I'm good. That's all I want to say. You're right. We're not poor, but go ahead.
It's like there's economies we could crush overnight if we just practice that collective economics that we did during the Black Wall Street time, which we didn't really have a choice. But when we worked collectively as a group of people, I think the only thing, and this is my personal opinion, that was our downfall is that we created the wealth, but we didn't create the defense force to protect that wealth. So what we need to do, we got to learn from our mistakes, create that wealth. I don't know who said it. I don't know if it was Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle. He said, if you really want gun reform, every black person go get a permit. And they'll do that reform, just like they did in California with the Black Panthers. Open carry, yeah, fine. Ronald Reagan got in. Oh, changing that.
Well, I think Minnie said last week, you want gun reform and all that other stuff. You say make sure everybody has a life insurance policy.
Yeah, that too.
Hey, Rob, I'll be honest. I don't know if I want gun reform. I want to make sure I always have access to my 9, my rifle, whatever. I want to make sure I can go in my room and I can grab my itch right now. I want to make sure I always have access to it, because whenever reform happens in this country, last time they had major reform around gun carry, it was around the Panthers and all the black groups that was springing up. All those brothers coming home from Vietnam, the veterans they had from Korea, they want to make sure these cats didn't arm up. They seen how effective they were. They wanted to make sure they didn't all kind of, form militias and come at them. So gun reform simply means we don't get access to weapons. I look at what's happening here in the city of Springfield with Cheryl Clapper, the police commissioner, holding back on licenses to carry until sometime in April or May. Do you think that she's going to keep LTCs away from non-blacks? Absolutely not. They're going to continue to get their licenses to carry. But we won't. So when we talk about gun reform, I think we got to be careful.
I'm not talking about gun reform. I don't really have an issue.
You said if we really want gun reform, everybody should buy a gun. We should buy a gun and just keep it quietly in the closet or on our waist or on our ankle. That's all. Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. You talk about keep it quiet. I'm kind of rolling back when we talk about plans. You can't tell everybody your plans. And we've been in scenarios like this, and I bet everybody on the panel's been in scenarios like this. When you're explicit, saying, "Hey, this is idea generation stage. We're trying to formulate some ideas and some plans." What we talk about here stays in the room, and not 5 minutes before you get out, your phone's ringing. It's like,
and that's kind of. But I think that it just needs to be made clear. The last meeting we had dealing with Black leadership development. You made it very, very, very clear to everyone. I haven't heard anything yet, but I'm sure people wouldn't have conversations. It's going to happen. The bottom line is it goes back to what we stated earlier. What are the repercussions when people violate that code? How far are you willing to go? You know what I mean? So let me get to Emma's comment, and then I want Hanif to explain something that he posted. Emma says we need a local economic philosophy established, communicated, and supported. Again, a local economic philosophy established, communicated, and support it. I think that goes back to what Minnie stated earlier, and how they effectively utilize conferences and workshops and seminars and all that stuff back in the day to make sure that those messages were conveyed. You set together a system of communication. You replicate it from community to community to make sure that everybody understands what it is we're attempting to do. So Emma, I agree, and I think the question is the real question is the process. Hanif, you stated that that's why we were saying something earlier. That's why the artist mindset is very necessary in a lot of these spheres. Talk about that.
So, I used to, my undergraduate degree is in jazz performance, and before I got my master's degree, I worked a variety of jobs. And I remember I was, a guy was trying to hire me for this really good paying job. And he said to me, "So you have a jazz degree?" It's like, "Yeah." "So how's it going to help you with supply chain management in the power industry?" And I said, "Simple." And I said to him, "You have rules, so do I. My rules are called melody, harmony, time. There's all these other things, but they would get a little bit more complicated." I said, "You have policies and procedures that govern those rules. So do I. We call it a song." I said, "But the thing is, when I get to the first time I get to the end of my song, I have this thing that I do called improvising. And when it comes to improvisation, there are rules I'm supposed to follow, but there are rules that I can bend. And there's some that I can completely break as long as the final resolution is what it's supposed to be." I said, "Your business is no different than that. You're going to give me the rules. I'm going to plug it into this process, and I'm going to do that." And the man looked at me. He said, "Interesting answer." He said, "So you have any other questions for me?" I said, "Where am I going to sit when I start?" He took me out of his office and pointed me to a desk. The reason why I tell that story is because the mentality that I have in terms of what we learn in the arts and the various disciplines in the arts, they're so transferable to a lot of these things that we're talking about. But because when you're not in the arts and or even when you are in the arts, you don't see these things as processes that you've developed that can be transferable in other places, you don't realize the amount of creativity that you have in developing these programs. So that was a response to Emma's comment about it takes creativity to develop programs. So what I mean by that is, there's a certain kind of creativity that we have in the various disciplines of the arts that if we look at the process of that is very transferable and can solve some of these how do we do these kind of things. And sometimes what we do in society in general is we look at one type of person or one type of occupation in one field and say, well, that's just the arts. Like, you don't really know anything about organization. I don't. Do you know how much stuff I have to organize to do what I do? Or that's just the arts. You don't know anything about drawing up a plan or a vision. Really? Then tell me, how do I organize a festival performance with all these other things? So there's transferable skills that I believe are very necessary in these spheres that people who are in the arts, performing arts, visual arts, can bring to the table. And that mindset, I think, is very necessary in some of these spheres because it's not the common mindset. It's not the, as you like to say, it's not the Western European educated mindset that says you do A, you do B, you do C. No, it's what artists tend to, whether you're musical or not, we tend to look at what the end product is and we build backwards. We start at the end and build to the beginning versus starting at the beginning to try to figure out where the end is going to be.
Glad you said that.
That's a great point.
All right. Keith Dodd says some rules you have to be willing to break. I couldn't agree with you more. Been breaking rules my whole life. I agree 100%, Keith. Got to keep breaking them. So yeah. Whew, I don't know where we are right now, but we're at
Minnie had her hand up.
Who's Minnie?
I just want to say that there's a lot of people, bring up the whole and Rob just articulated what I'm about to say. Oh, we need to control our own economy, and we've done that. What we need is to bring back a healthy respect for violence. Okay, there was a time when slave owners couldn't sleep at night because we wasn't going for it. And then you got our ancestors who rather die than be in bondage. And we got the ancestors who said, I'm gonna kill you on my way out. And we need to to have a healthy respect for violence. Like the mob organized crime is what they call it. No different from politics and what goes on, but it's organized crime. You borrow from the mob and you don't pay them back. Somebody's coming for you and your whole family. I'm not saying that we have to be that intense, but we have to have that type of organization, understanding, and structure. If you snitch on the mob, you're going into hiding. You know what I mean? We need to bring back a healthy respect for violence. Like gangs, they got codes. Having a code and adhering to a code, this is not nothing new to us. Okay, we just don't have it. That energy is not properly channeled and directed to our benefit. But when you're in a gang, you know what I mean, and some shit go down, you better be ready to ride out if that's the role that you play in that gang. The mob don't just have enforcers; they got judges, they got accountants.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They got all types of people that fit a particular role. But best, no matter what role you play, if you step out of line, you know you'll be missing limbs at the very least. And we need to get back to that. And I'm not saying just like internally, yeah, of course, internally, but when you got, Tommy Sotomayor's, disrespect, going on a whole rant against Black women for hours on a regular basis, he should be expecting a knock on his door. And as far as people being ready to die, I think that falls on the men. Only biologically speaking, okay. We have to keep the race, replenishable or whatever. But those are the men are a big population who have not so healthy respect for violence, but it's effective. You know what I mean? So we need a healthy respect for violence. It doesn't matter what we build, we have to be able to protect it. You know what I mean? Like if we have we got something that we have intellectual proprietary intelligence or something like that, and somebody tries to infringe upon that. Even if we can win in a court of law or don't win in a court of law, you know what I'm saying? We should come out on top if we live by the law of the jungle. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't even matter if you can or can't take a legal route or whatever. There's other ways to get things done. And we need to go back to those creative ways of getting things done. We can't just build and build and build economically and don't militarize or don't have some sort of armed forces. Every organization has enforcers. Every organization has enforcers. Every branch of the government has some sort of enforcement policy and consequences for doing things. And we need that too. We need a healthy respect for violence.
Well, but you said something else in there that, I don't know. I think this might have been the week before you joined that we talked about, and maybe, I don't know if you remember, Rob, I don't know, we talked about, the fact that our intellectual property as people is either taken, stolen, or we don't appreciate sometimes the intellectual property we're putting out, and we don't value it enough to say, wait a minute, this is my intellectual capital. I have to take ownership of this intellectual capital. I have to do something with this intellectual capital, and the things that we do, because so much of what happens in this country was either invented by us or has been stolen from us. I mean, and I'll use the kind of comical example to me, there's a march on Saturday. What was the name of that march? The MAGA March. I've heard of another million something march. Which one was it? The Million Man March. Who started that? So it's kind of ironic that the guy that does all the trash talking about, Black people was trying to take an idea from Black people that wasn't successful, as far as his numbers goes and everything. And then at that healthy attitude of violence that he was talking about, there were counter protesters there with that healthy attitude of violence towards those pro supporters. Whether you subscribe, and this kind of also goes into something that's been said a lot on this platform. It is everyone has a role to play. Everyone has a place that they fit. Not everyone can fit in every place, but when you find your place that you fit, be in that place. Don't worry about a place you can't fit, because that's not your role. But take the role that you have, do something with it, continue to keep it going, continue to keep it working, and most importantly, and I think this is one of the things that I think about a lot, is when you're in that role, the moment you occupy that role, you need to start planning for succession. Because we don't plan for succession enough when it comes to organizing. And that is another reason why some efforts, not all, that's another reason why some efforts fail. Because once you start, if you're not planning for who's going to take it over, then it's not going to last. It's not going to be generational. It's just going to be a fad that will be here today, gone when you die. And that's not what we're talking about. So there's so many components that go into this, and we need to have the people who can fill out all these different components, doing what they can do. And you've got the people that can plan and strategize, the people that can build the structures, the people that can operate the structures, the people that can defend the structures. We need all of that together, and we need it in a way where no one's sitting there saying, well, I got to be up front. No, I got to be up front. No, it's whoever's equipped to do what, let them do that, and let's stop worrying about who's up front or who's getting the most attention, or who's not getting the most attention, because that's not successful planning.
Right. And I think any type of plan built around a personality or a small group of personalities will never succeed. This approach has to be systemic, it has to be multi-generational in terms of long-term impact, and it has to be circular. There should be no one leader of any type of movement. We start talking about, kind of uplifting our community across the country, across the globe. It cannot be built around a personality. We've seen that happen. God knows how many times that one personality disappears and everything disappears. It has to be circular. It has to be inclusive of all Black folks who are willing to stay on code, period. So I agree with you, but we can't, I just want to add that.
Yeah. I want to talk to the team about the Boule right quick and get your insights on that. The Boule, basically, in layman's terms, the middle managers, the Black middle managers of Black America, and one of the oldest Greek organizations. I think it was started. I wrote it down. Sigma Pi Phi, and it was started in the late 1800s or so. What do you guys think? I mean, we see them on the news a lot. Some of the members, Martin Luther King, W.E.B. Du Bois, Eric Holder, Colin Powell. Kind of goes back to that brown paper bag thing. Go ahead, D.
All right. You can bring up all those names. I'm gonna point to the brother who came here from another country and formed the largest organization in the history of the states. We're talking Marcus Garvey. He was a part of Boule. So when he established the UNIA, he was what they call a little ugly, fat, dark Black man with an accent. This man organized, he motivated, he inspired. He didn't ask anybody for permission to do shit. So as far as the Boule, I think it's like a 30-second question. Shit don't matter. We got people who are living their best lives, people who are organizing with or without them. Our problem when you talk about the Boule, we're still talking about white people coming in and telling us and dictating who our leadership will be. That's the system. That's like, bro, you're not a part of this conversation. On his way out, he's escorted out by, whoever. And whether or not we see them ever again, I couldn't tell you. But the bottom line is we can't let them define who our leadership is. And again, you ever want to talk about leadership? Let's just start with Marcus. If we ain't starting with Marcus, then we're not really starting. You can also go a little further back to 1907, or was it? Yeah, 1906, 1907, with William Monroe Trotter and the establishment of the Niagara movement. And what happens when you allow, not Talented 10. He was organizing free Blacks, period. People, business owners, spiritual leaders, all that. The Niagara movement, unlike the NAACP, was all about the upliftment of Black people. When you allow Negroes in, sellouts, coons, whatever you want to call them, into your organization, you'll watch that organization split. They were the first major organization to split because they allowed any and everybody in the door, and they allowed sellouts, co-opted individuals into the organization. WB took all the stuff from the Niagara movement, got with the Jewish community, formed the NAACP. They've been around ever since. They've been ineffective ever since. So people, I'm not talking to you, Rob. I'm saying for anybody who happens to view this, if you're going to talk about an organizational capacity of Black folks, start with William Monroe Trotter in terms of what to do and what not to do. Then make your way over to Marcus Garvey. Period. Not the nation, nobody.
It matters. I think it matters in terms of knowledge you can't leave them out because we have to know what worked and what didn't, so we don't make the same mistake. Martin made a mistake in joining the Boule, and he realized it, and it cost him his life at the hands of his own people. You know what I mean? The friendlies weren't wearing ties, or however it went, but they was in on it. So I think it matters in terms of this is the temptation. This is why people are in love with the white power structure, because of that American dream they sold. So I think it's easy to buy into, especially if you don't understand what it is. Then they start asking you to do some crazy shit. You know what I mean? Then they start then you understand more of what you're dealing with, and there's no way out. So I think it's relevant in terms of knowing who your enemy is and knowing the sort of snares they put out there to trap you in and what you can't do. But I love me some. I'm a Garveyite. I'm a Pan-African. And I tell people all the time, like, this man organized millions of people. No internet, no social media, but barely. What you had to dial in, you probably had to dial into the operator to talk to somebody and say, "Hey, operator, can you connect me to?"
And in some places, telegraph, but they got it done.
They got it done by the millions, and that's an amazing feat, because we can't organize millions of people, 4 million people, and we have all those tools and we have the money. And Marcus Garvey is definitely a prime example of Black leadership and what we need to be doing. He was organizing deals with other countries in Africa, so we can have some place to go, so we can have a headquarters to set up and get strong. And when he ever so started that freight company, oh my God,
line.
Yeah, that's when he had to go. That's when he had to go. So the point where our leaders get assassinated or try to, you know what I'm saying, call an audible and move different, we need to look at those integral points in history, because that's the points that we need to get back to. We need to get back to Malcolm sitting down with Martin, sitting down with Sam Cooke, who had the money. He was an entertainer. The creatives, you know what I'm saying, they have their place. And just sitting at those tables and getting organized. People was mad at Malcolm when he did his pilgrimage, and he went to you know, when we start having political ties with other countries, we tend to lose our leaders, or the leaders tend to lose their followers. A lot of people was mad at Malcolm for that. A lot of people was mad at Carmichael when he said, "Listen, this is what we got to do." Because a lot of people like, "Listen, we got issues right here. You need to stay right here." Like, no, we can't improve right here until the mother is strong enough to support us, so we're not waiting on the white power structure to feed us to give us the opportunity.
Absolutely.
So the Boule is a good example of what temptation not to succumb to or fall victim to. And when you have those parallels, like Marcus Garvey, we need to study what they did and how they did. He had a conference. That's what I was thinking about when I said those conferences. He had a couple of them. Millions of people from all over the place. Too. And when you start doing that, that's when we got to really come together and start protecting ourselves and have that healthy respect for violence. Because trust and believe, when you get to a certain level, they're coming for, just like they came for Martin. Like, what? We helped you. We helped you get to this point. You wanted X, Y, and Z. We gave it to you. Now you want to go sit down with Malcolm and do all cross code stuff.
They coming.
You lose your life. So it's important. We have the blueprint there. We just need to start taking the steps and building the foundations so that we can actually excessive dreams, because the civil rights movement never finished. We never accomplished what we set out to accomplish for ourselves.
Absolutely. And no, they never stop coming. You mentioned Sam Cooke, and you look at how Sam Cooke was murdered. They claimed that a woman beat him so bad that his neck was half broken off his shoulder. He was murdered. For that very reason, his involvement, his establishment of a Black publishing firm so that Black artists can maintain their rights, keep their, their profits, long-term revenue, all that stuff, the royalties. So they will come. But I agree with you. First line of business is, if you're really, really, really about it, you gotta have the courage to stand up and put a defense mechanism in place. Deterrence is the beginning of everything. What's gonna happen when they come to get you? Are you ready? I don't care what you build up. If you ain't ready, they'll weaponize a policy and get you out of here. They'll false charges. They'll get you out of here. They have a million weapons at their disposal, and the only thing we have is rhetoric half the time. So I agree with you, Minnie. I think defense is everything. A healthy respect for violence goes back to simple term, defense. You got to defend yourself. But you got to have balls to be able to do that. Oh, courage. I see the head. Yeah. Gotta have some courage. You gotta be courageous to do that.
It was that part. Yeah, because Sam Cooke was gonna I don't know, what was it? What's that famous lawyer? He was gonna bankroll our fight for reparations. They was putting together.
Oh, Johnny Cochran?
Yes. Who also died of aneurysm, which is something you can't prove at all. Or something like that. He died in a way you can't prove. But his Sam Cooke was gonna bankroll his efforts to fight for our that's the word through the grapevine. I heard through the grapevine, no. And then that's when he died. So they're definitely doing the black ops, and they're infiltrating, they're paying attention, and we need to get like them, not to be them, but in order to defeat
counterintelligence. Counterintelligence.
But
it's for them. They work the way they were designed to work, and we can replicate these systems to work for us, not necessarily join in those systems and try to break them, but we can replicate these systems and these practices and procedures for our benefit. It's never going to happen because their system works so well. We can't use their system against them.
You can always insert a virus into the programming, but anything around the defense and all that stuff, and let's keep that offline. I just thought about that.
Yeah.
Let's keep that offline. Well, you already said what got to get said. How we do it, we don't need to publicize it. I'm telling you, folks got to talk offline about that. But I think you got to be willing to die for it. You got to be willing to defend it. I'm just going to simply say that. Keith Dodd said desegregation was one of the worst things that happened to the black community. I think one of the worst things that ever happened to the black community, Keith, I very rarely disagree with you. One of the worst things that happened to the black community were other black folks making sure that other black people were enslaved by these aliens. Beginning of our problems.
What you mean by that?
Well, bottom line is when they started using black folks as property, and we did nothing to defend it, that's when our problem. I think that was one of the worst things that ever could have happened. The fact that we allowed that to happen to ourselves. We should have fought to the death for that.
But see, that goes back to like the church comment, because there was a lot of people and a lot of
I get you. 90 of the rooms. There's a whole lot.
A whole lot.
And
they didn't necessarily. Not a lot of people had much of a choice. You know, not that they had a choice, but it's like, hey, so we gonna kill all. You know what I mean?
But then there were people, there were tribes, there were folks who sat by and they just watched. I understand that there are a lot of folks, man. I can break down the history on about 6 or 7 different islands. We're talking about African revolts. I hate calling them slave revolts. From Haiti to Barbados to Jamaica. They set the gold standard for fighting back. So I get you on that. Well, I'm just saying, before the continent, not in the continent, but here in the States, there were black folks here. And the fact that we actually allowed them. I look at the indigenous population. One of the worst things that could have happened was them even allowing them folks to get up off their ships and touch this land. So that's my thought on that, and I'm gonna stick with it. We will always disagree on that part, but I'm just like, I think we should have fought. Same thing you're saying now. Some things you fight for.
You know, COINTELPRO couldn't survive or even happen if it wasn't for the coons.
Well, it's still happening. So who's the coon? Are we all coons?
No, I mean the infiltrators.
I guarantee you, I can look right now. I see 3 other people aside from myself who probably got FBI COINTEL files. Uno, I'm looking at, let's see, we got the academic dude up top. See, black women. Oh, Minnie, that would be you. Y'all the most dangerous people on the planet. Rob, you helping to organize. COINTELPRO exists, and they probably got files on everybody. Max Parker says, the Abolished Slavery National Network is doing that organizing, unifying, and making real law and policy change. They just effectively changed 6 state constitutions 2 weeks ago, abolishing legal slavery in 3 of them. Congratulations, Max. That's good work.
That's dope.
That's okay. That's real dope.
Keith Dodd says deterrence is key. Deterrence is everything, and that's your defense mechanism. And I'm not sure which point, but at some point, Keith agreed with one of us.
With COINTELPRO, though, I think the ego. I don't want to specifically say the male ego, But I think ego played a major role in how effective COINTELPRO was too. They was able to cause dissension among organizations by letters and stuff like that, and that shouldn't have been as effective. You know, I shouldn't have been able to get a letter from somebody in another organization saying whatever makes me feel threatened or whatever's going to come between us working together to accomplish our goals. So without that ego, you know, if people sit down and talk to each other too, and that still has an effect today. If somebody say, hey, somebody did this to you and somebody ready to go ride out, do a drive-by rather than saying, well, why don't y'all sit down and talk? We can have this elder or this mediator. We can get to the bottom of it. We can look at evidence and see, you know what I'm saying, what he said and she said, and who's really telling the truth of what really happened. But that ego played a major role. COINTELPRO, even with the infiltrators, would not have been as effective if people were willing to sit down face to face and talk to each other about our issues.
I agree. And you said, Max Parther said, nah, Max, you think? Hold on. He says, I know I have an FBI file. You think you have an FBI file, Max? Of course you do.
Black identity extremists.
Pretty sure I do as well. But Minnie, you said something at first. You said the male ego. I agree with you 100%. The male ego. Can't even fight that. When Elaine Brown took control of the Black Panther Party outside of Fred Hampton, that was probably one of the most stable periods that they have. She did not compromise, and they approached her on numerous occasions. A number of the Black women leaders who had in existence during that period of time were approached, and none of them broke code. It's always the dudes that break code. We break code. So, but yeah, Max got a file. So, but you know what? We're past the hour and a half mark, so we're going to cap it right here. There are a lot of things that we need to do. Folks, there's a lot of work that we have. Start by, look, I don't care what you do this week. Make sure you support Black businesses, Black-owned businesses. I support Conscious Wear. I dig their shirts. I just bought about 8 shirts representing the sisters because, sisters make it all happen at the end of the day. Beginning and end of the day, it's always the sisters that end up with the rifles last. So, they get us through.
We talk about Black business. We got a 2020 next Saturday from 2 to 4 at Madam's Beauty Supply in Hartford. Black-owned, family-owned health and beauty aid store. Demetrius Chambly and his wife Latoya Chambly. They do a lot in the community, and the 2020 is basically a symbol of collective economics. 20 people going to the store spending $20. Not only gives a quick inflush of cash to the business, but also helps promote the business products and services. So sent an invite out. I know everybody on the panel responded, but if we can continue to support Black-owned businesses, create our own economy, keep it within the Black community, shop Black first, think about everything that entails about being Black, stay on code, for whatever you learned about today's conversation about being on code, and Black first, and support your community, because no one's going to do it for you. No Messiah's coming down from the heavens. G.I. Joe ain't coming. Black Panther's not coming. No one's coming. We got to do it ourselves.
Well, all right. And my computer just froze. So
good.
All right, y'all. Closing thoughts. We'll start with Rob just gave his. Go ahead, Hanif, closing thoughts.
As with all these conversations, and I say a very similar closing thought a lot, we have to all be willing to do whatever our part is. Whatever your role is, whatever your part is, whatever skill set you bring to the table, you have to be willing to do that. This has to go from a conversation that's happening to actions that are happening. And as long as we're all willing to do that and all willing to see we may not have a specific set of common goals, but the common goal really is the upliftment and the betterment of our community from this generation forward. So do what you can where you are. There's nothing too small that's going to help. There's nothing, you don't have to worry about making a big, huge things. The big, huge steps happen, when people take a bunch of little steps. So do whatever it is that you can do. And a quote that I've really loved ever since Dee has said it on this show: some of you out there need to put yourselves in positions to be elected. And I'll end with that.
All right. Ms. Jones.
You made a comment about, black under black women, and I just want to point out how I have read the autobiography of Afeni Shakur. I told the Jasmine Guy, great read, and she was talking about how she was subjugated as a woman in the organization and told to only do certain things, but she came back and saved all of them. If it wasn't for her, they would have went down for some serious time, even though they left her hanging. Be black first. I think that's where we all need to start. Be black first. Be black on purpose. Be black unapologetically. Whenever you can, create the opportunity to uplift black people and avoid doing things to set us back. It's real basic.
All right.
Can I say one last thing? Black people.
The mic dropper. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let's refrain from using the term people of color. That does not apply to us. Just like the term minorities doesn't apply to us. Disenfranchised doesn't apply to us. I've heard a new term, professionals of color. I saw that on LinkedIn. I was like, look, these people are bugging. And diversity inclusion is just another way of saying people of color. It's another smokescreen. Black. Don't be afraid to say black. That's all I got to say.
All right. And make sure y'all check out the metrorecord.com. The print newspaper is coming. Everything is up and running. We will have a newspaper that focuses on black news, views, and opinions. So go to the website, visit it, check it out. Let us know what you think. Ladies and gentlemen, this is On Deck. We appreciate you. Don't forget, Max Parthis has a show on tonight at 7 p.m. Max, if you don't mind, just throw the link in the comment section. Make sure everybody check it out. They have some information they're going to be sharing. We have to support our local abolitionists because they're doing some of the things that we won't do or don't do. With that being said, folks, I'm tired. We out of here. This is The Outside, y'all. Peace.
God's walked in.
Rejoice together.